Wherever you are, welcome to another edition of My Take on China, and please do me a favor. If you're a subscriber, please check to see if you're still subscribed. So many people have told me that they've been unsubscribed without their knowledge. If you aren't a subscriber, please feel free to do so, and you will learn a lot about the misinformation related to China. If you're subscribed and still subscribing, that's great. Thank you. The idea of decoupling started during the Trump era. In 2020, the word began to appear much more frequently. In common sense terms, it simply can't happen. Any rational thinker knows this, so decoupling was changed to derisking. And if we're honest, that makes more sense. But derisking, or taking the risk out of dealing with an adversary, only makes sense if you have an adversary. China did not choose to be an adversary of the United States, or any other country for that matter. Quite the opposite. Xi Jinping has called for cooperation several times, never, ever shown an adversarial stance. In choosing this adversarial position, the US is swimming against the tide. BRICS is growing. It now encompasses 10 countries with 45% of the global population, and the BRI continues to expand. Depending on your interpretation of the Memorandum of Understanding, it's either 146 or 151 countries of the world now. Either way, it means more than 2/3 of all the nations are now cooperating with China. Instead of cooperating, the United States has enacted two laws. The America Competes Act, passed in 2022, with an annual allowance of $500 million, and the United States Innovation and Competition Act of 21, which allows another $250 million a year, both to produce negative information against China. The old saying, if you can't say something nice, you shouldn't say anything at all, applies very much to the US government in its current, previous, and what is likely to be its future form. It's easy to understand why some Americans are fearful of China's rise, with $750 million budgeted just to create a negative view, of course. There are some sensible risks that the US should really consider. One of those is China making parts for their weapons. But why does anyone, other than trusted US corporations, manufacture this kind of equipment? The answer is that China really isn't a threat, and they can do this cheaply, efficiently, and to specification. Even the CEO of major defense corporation, Raytheon, was on TV recently saying that China is an irreplaceable part of their supply chain. But that's what de-risking should mean: the protection of assets that a country really needs in the event it goes to war with the only supplier of those assets. But China's never wanted a war with the USA. The USA has chosen competition over cooperation, not China. What caused a lot of the hype around the decoupling back in 2020 was pure inefficiency. Trump vowed he would never order Americans to wear masks, and so masks were not ordered in sufficient numbers for a pandemic. When they were ordered, it was China that supplied them. But Trump had placed tariffs on them earlier so that stocks were in short supply when they were needed and more expensive for Americans when they were delivered. Now, this caused some US senators to deflect blame on China for these problems, and that started the call for decoupling. The entire de-risking strategy has nothing to do with any threat from China. The US is a dangerous and greedy beast. It's created every risk that their people now fear. All China has done is build an economy that, according to Harvard University, is now larger than the USA's. We never hear anyone in the US administration talk of China breaching international law because they can't quote an international law that's been broken. We only ever hear of some obtuse but unwritten rules-based order that no one has ever seen. If there are rules, then surely international law should hold them, and they do. The USA weaponizes these rules, which are tools of international protection, and it uses them to wield against its adversaries but refuses to ratify them itself. Instead, they quote this rules-based order that they've invented to make it look like they follow the rules and China doesn't. In 1964, China created the Non-First Use Agreement for nuclear weapons, and to date, it's the only country in the world with nuclear weapons to unconditionally make such a pledge. The USA, the only country to have actually used nuclear weapons as an act of war, will not. China has signed and ratified UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, while the USA has not only refused to ratify it, they are in breach of it, including placing missile bases in the Arctic and operating illegally inside of Chinese waters on their freedom of navigation activities, neither of which are lawful under UNCLOS, which does allow for peaceful passage as a right. But no such thing as freedom of navigation exists except in these US made-up rules-based order. The US is in opposition to and not in favor of any of the recognized international human rights obligations. They are opposed to economic and social rights even within their own country, and this can be seen by the lack of medical care and education opportunities for their own impoverished people. But it's wider than that. They're opposed to all rights of development. They're opposed to the right of food being a basic human right. They're the only country in the world that has not ratified the rights of children. China ratified this in 1992. In fact, they're the only country in the world opposed to every convention and mandate in the United Nations in the field of human rights. The US has not only refused to ratify the International Criminal Court, they've gone one step further. They've created a law called the American Service Members Protection Act, nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. And this allows them to invade Holland, the Netherlands, if any of their personnel are arrested or charged by the International Criminal Court. China has invaded no country in almost half a century, while the US has invaded many. China has occupied no country in its entire history, while the US has occupied and still does occupy several. China has never threatened to invade anywhere, including Taiwan, but has been accused of this by the only country that does have troops on the island. It really is quite simple. China has risen peacefully. Its economy has some challenges, but it's strong. And according to every measurement that's been applied to it, China's people are happier in their lives, more satisfied with, and have more trust in their government than any survey conducted in the USA in a generation by the same people surveying. The US uses whatever tricks or ruses and tells whatever stories it wants to tell. It never seeks proper investigations into allegations it makes, because those investigations would find nothing. Instead, allegations are propagated through media as if they were true. As a country, the US denies, deflects, and obfuscates any allegations made against itself. So when considering de-risking, China is not the issue. Where any risks really lie is a long, long way from China. China is not the enemy. The people telling us China are the enemy are the real ones to watch out for. And that's it for this one. I'll see you next time. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I'll say goodbye for now.